a country in Uganda, and she made a very fundamental statement. She was just wondering how it is possible for a person in a slum to be able to live in a skyscraper on the 11th floor. Let me tell Sarah, it is possible. We have done it in Kenya. The cost of a social house on the 11th floor is the same as the cost of a slum dwelling house. They used to pay $40. They now pay $40 on the 11th floor because we have set up the mechanism for that to happen. Finally, let me speak to two paradoxes. As I stand here, 25% of the world's population will be living in the African continent by 2050. If there is a place that housing is important and urgent, it is in our continent. Why? Because that is where the world population, a quarter of the world population, will be living. And 70% of that population will be living in urban centers. And therefore, housing becomes a central pillar of how the world will look like in the future. And that is why it is important for this meeting to focus on two items. We have a serious paradox. A continent that has huge resources, that will have the world's largest population, 25% of the world's population by 2050, today cannot access concessional funding to drive its development. Much more important, housing, because today African countries and emerging economies pay 2, 3, 4 times more to access development financing because of elements of risk. We need to correct this paradox, and that is why we have said there is urgent need to reform the international financial architecture so that it is aligned to the needs, the requirements, and the imperatives of the current world. Most of our countries did not exist in 1945 when the Bretton Woods institutions were established. Today, we do not have enough voice, we do not have enough access, and even the paradox is that the countries who need concessional funding the most pay more than the countries who don't need it when they go to the market. That has to be corrected. And that is why we are of the firm position as African countries that we need the reform of the international financial architecture so that it represents the exigencies of the present. And finally, we need to correct another paradox, that 1.5 billion people in the African continent, the largest body of membership of the United Nations, 55 countries from Africa, are not represented at the highest decision-making organ of the United Nations Security Council. And the bigger paradox is that 60% of the agenda of the United Nations Security Council are African issues. What a paradox, that your issues are being discussed on a table that you are not represented. And that is why we are saying, for the survival of the United Nations, there must be reform that corrects this anomaly, that brings justice so that the United Nations and the United Nations Security Council specifically becomes representative, democratic, and brings on board the views of the African continent. That is how we are going to solve the problems of the present and figure out how we are going to have a better future. In Baku, we have the opportunity to influence and to change the cities of the future and make them livable, sustainable, and good for everybody. I thank you.